Welcome, everyone. I'm Rochelle Wilhite, the designated broker of Best Choice Realty, and tonight we're going to be talking about selling a home in an off-market situation. So we have had a previous call about this topic, but as you guys are probably experiencing, we're seeing a lot of questions coming into to me and to Jerry Kay and to other brokers and other mentors in our office in regards to this topic. So it's definitely a topic that we need to revisit and make sure you guys are prepared to with what paperwork, how do I handle it so that we don't get ourselves in trouble. Some of you have used the word, I think the word is used as a pocket listing. Washington State is an area where we do not take pocket listings. It's against the NWMLS rules. However, there is an opportunity for you to represent a seller and to represent a buyer in a transaction that's off market. It just cannot be called a pocket listing. We cannot be taking a listing and then holding it. That's against the rules. And in fact, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. So first off, just want to make sure you guys know that. And then tonight we're going to go over how do you properly represent a seller in an off-market situation, and how do you write it up, and what are the forms that you need, and we're going to actually do it in practice. But to kick it off, as you guys know, I like to have fun out there. And so I sometimes I let my family members, my sisters, my brothers go out there and kind of stir up some trouble, if you will. So tonight I'm going to show you a kind of a Facebook thread, share with you what this mail piece that went out to my sister, and just kind of go over and give you guys some real things that have happened recently in the marketplace. So you can show you how people are really practicing and really trying to get at that seller. That is where the business is right now. If you guys can practice on getting sellers, talking with people that are thinking about selling, talking about the marketplace and getting that trust won, you're going to have a lot easier time in connecting your buyers up with properties. So let's go to the next slide and let's just jump right into it, Shannon. And again, if you're new to these types of webinar trainings, if you want to chat, you're welcome to chat. We do mute the lines while I talk so that we can get through the content. I go very quick. So some of you that are new to the business, you may have to listen to it after and kind of write down some notes as I talk. But we do record these after so you can review. So this on the screen, what you see is a Facebook. Can you believe it? Not one of our brokers, but another broker. My sister's name is Kathleen, and she actually looked up her Facebook profile, knew that she lived in Puyallup, probably in the downtown area, and messaged her on Facebook Messenger. And she basically said, do you have a home on such and such in Puyallup? If interested, this is, and she gave her name. And then my sister quickly responded, sorry, my house is not for sale. She's like, 6th Avenue, right? Thank you for getting back to me. She said, yeah, 6th Avenue. I also sent a letter, so ignore. My sister says, haha, okay, I'm curious. What price range are they shopping for a house like mine in this market? And then she says, we hadn't gotten that far. They love downtown Puyallup and saw that it was obviously updated and or new. I sold their home for last year. So again, just trying to build rapport. So there are things I like that this broker did, and there's things that I think could have used some work. So again, we want to learn from some of the mistakes that some of our friends and colleagues at other companies, or even within our own brokerage house, things that you should do and should not do. Tell me, she's just building rapport. So on the left side, tell me more about your home so I can do an analysis. Have you updated it top to bottom? Plumbing, electrical, cosmetic only, granite, quartz, how many beds, how many baths? So my sister did respond, 3-bed, 3.5 bath, quartz throughout, has an office in the front, everything brand new in 2020. Real hardwood floors, bottom level, carpet upstairs. Keeping the dialogue open. I love that this broker kept the dialogue just going on Facebook Messenger. Don't try to change up the form of communication with that potential seller. She certainly was communicating by Facebook Messenger, 2,200, including garage, not including garage, and then she gave her the square footage. Then it didn't take much time at all. I would have to verify this, but my guess is what happened is she went into some sort of online valuation. Instead of doing her CMA, doing a good job, because obviously the seller is communicating with her, telling about the house, finding out it was brand new construction in 2020. She writes the range is 244 to 264 per square foot for condition, location, and square footage. And then she said, which puts you at 435 to 475 for a listing price. Ouch. So that's where this agent went wrong is, she was spouting off numbers in a Facebook Messenger post. Never would I ever do that. I would not advise that you guys do that. Build enough rapport, get that appointment, then in person go over these types of very important numbers. Because once my sister saw the 435 to 475K for the listing price, if you're interested, I can send you comps with photos and a seller's net sheet and all of this. Please let me know if you have any questions or if the numbers are compelling. And my sister simply responds, no, not interested. Thanks for the info though. So it's kind of like a situation where a lot of great rapport building, but she should have carried that through to get the appointment so that she actually could meet with this potential seller. What price would make you a seller? Happy face, she says. If they're paying cash, we wouldn't have to worry about the appraisal. If you change your mind, let me know. So again, she has this kind of working knowledge about the marketplace. She certainly has a seller and a buyer who are interested in having a conversation about values, pricing, marketing, maybe doing an off market. Certainly has a relationship with the buyer. She worked with the buyer last year and could not come up with anything that made sense to them, and certainly was looking for something in the newer in downtown Puyallup. So I love the dialogue. I like that she kept it on Facebook Messenger. I actually shocked that there was a Facebook Messenger post. My sister was like, I captured it all for you, Rochelle. I was like, well, that's fantastic. But I don't like how there's numbers discussed on Facebook Messenger. That's not the place to have a conversation about a price range or evaluation. You really want to sit down with that client to understand, tour the property. For heaven's sakes, my sister just finished the custom construction. It's custom, you guys. It's definitely worth more than 435 to 475. She had to purchase the land, go through all the permitting, custom builder, did all kinds of really nice custom things to this property. Certainly wasn't worth just throwing a number of 435 to 475K and just hoping that my sister would nab onto it. In fact, she went away from it. But you know what? I'll tell you one thing, what this agent did. She actually sent a piece of mail. She went above and beyond. So if you do have a seller and you're building great rapport, my sister was pretty impressed because she got the mail in the mail. Just a simple card, didn't have to be anything fancy, had a waterfall of all things. I probably wouldn't have done that, but certainly has a little message, and it had a little cupcake, something local that she threw in there with her business card. And she said, Kathleen, I have a client interested in your home at 110 6th Avenue in Puyallup. Is it for sale? Question mark. If so, can you please call me? And then she puts her phone number, and then she puts a little gift card. The part that you guys have to watch out for is that you can get fined by the MLS. Is if this was for sale, she would be soliciting my listing, which is a total no-no, and you can get fined. In fact, you can lose a lot of money by getting fined if you don't put on there, if this is listed, this is not an attempt to solicit your listing. You need something like that if you're going to mail or send a postcard, a disclaimer. Even if she would have had a disclaimer on her business card, that would have worked. Or just a simple little note, if it's listed, please disregard. Something like that would have been appropriate. But you know what? She went after the business. Got to give her credit for that. Not one of my brokers or our brokers that work at our firm, but she definitely was pulling out all her stops, going very traditional, and the traditional is working really well. Many of the listing agents I've spoken to have either received, some of their sellers or done these off-market type of situations just because they've got very, I would call belly to belly, tried some traditional, called some people, made some phone calls. found out that such and such Johnny is selling down the street because of the neighbor that knew that you were in real estate. Those are the types of listings or those seller opportunities that are happening out there. And it's because you guys are actually doing some traditional marketing. You're actually making some cold calls. You're actually doing some for sale by owners, but I want to make sure you guys don't get yourself in trouble. So there is a do not call. So, I mean, if she wanted to pick up the phone, my sister is not on the do not call registry. But just so you guys are aware of the do not call, I want Shannon to put that up on the screen. There is a do not call. And if you want to, if you're tired of getting I know Jerry Kay and I talked about it. We're tired of getting some of these solicitors for our properties. So if you want to put yourself on the do not call, you would go to this website, and it's just the Federal Trade Commission. I would say that we're getting more text messages, which are not as regulated as they probably need to be through the Federal Trade Commission. So that might be a way to go at the business, but you got to be very careful adding your number to the registry. You can simply do that real quick tonight. But also just reviewing what is allowed and as far as what you can do. If you go scroll down, Shannon, it tells you if you are a marketer, what is the registry doesn't do. Can a company still call me with a sales pitch? So if you're just political calls are exempt. So charitable calls are exempt. Debt collection is exempt. Informational calls are not exempt, or I'm sorry, are exempt from the FTC. So you could potentially, if you're not selling something, if you're just giving information to a potential seller about what's going on in the marketplace, that is okay. You can make that phone call even to somebody that's on the do not call list to do a survey. Those are allowed under the FTC. You could be on the do not call list and still get a survey call. Those are some creative ways that real estate brokers are basically calling and connecting with sellers. Now, if the moment you start having a conversation about pricing and selling, and I have a buyer and all of that, then you do it's in a sales pitch. But if you're just giving information to a potential seller about what's going on in the Puyallup downtown marketplace, perfectly fine to call somebody on the do not call list. There are a lot of different companies. RedX is one. Mojo Dialer is another. There are plenty. The title company has a list of people that are on the do not call and are on the do not call. You can get those lists for a very small amount of money if you're wanting to do a lot of cold calls and call a specific neighborhood or area. We are seeing success with some of those registries. And just make sure if they're on the do not call list that you're not having a sales related conversation. It's purely informational, or it's a survey of some sort of type. Those are perfectly okay to call anybody that has a phone number, even if it is on the do not call list. So hopefully that was helpful, but you want to go to consumer.ftc.gov. That is the website you would go to get more information about what is the registry, what does it do, what does it not do, who's on it, can I put my name on, phone number on it, and then it kind of lists what you can and cannot say or what you can and cannot do. So that is what you want to do, especially if you're talking with a title company. There are people at the MLS that are getting fined because they're calling people and people are getting really upset and they're calling the MLS and they're looking, some of them are even forming complaints. So when I spoke with my attorney, she was actually working on a couple of these that were very big, I think some listing agents didn't know what they're doing and they're thinking, I'm just not going to get caught. And in fact, they called the wrong person and they lawyered up. And so there are going to be some complaints being filed with the FTC and things like that. So be careful when you're out there making a lot of phone calls. If you're going to do one or two, or you're just calling, like in this case, that agent who is being very creative, if she would have called my sister, and maybe she was on the do not call, she could have had a conversation about the downtown Puyallup area. And my sister probably would have been very warm and friendly and giving her a lot of information about what she did to her home. And maybe she would have told her to bug off. So the chances of somebody, actually turning you in is actually probably very slim. But then again, if you're making a lot of phone calls, a lot of phone numbers, you want to make sure you know the rules before you make those cold calls. Let's go to the next stuff, Shannon. Let's go we're going to actually write one up. So a lot of you have said, okay, I've got a buyer and it's so difficult. I've actually got bid out. I've heard this from at least 10 people over the weekend. So this is not made up. And Rochelle, I've got a buyer. And the first thing I say to them is, do you have a buyer agency agreement? You really should have a buyer agency agreement if you are going to entertain looking at other off-market type of opportunities for that particular buyer. It's a lot of work to make contact, to make phone calls, to send mailers, to send letters, to hand address. My goodness, I don't know how long it took her to send this to probably 20, 30 people downtown Puyallup, but it takes time to put the postage on and to go through all of that. I would highly recommend you have a buyer agency agreement. So the way I do this, and I've done many Zoom appointments and buyer consultation appointments on Zoom, is I do the consultation with them. And after I get done with the consultation with that particular buyer on Zoom, I will send them something like Shannon has created here. And I've started incorporating the additional disclosure. So I attach the Washington state disclosures I'm required to provide you. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet me on Zoom. And I also include the sample, the buyer presentation agreement. And I also send that to them for signature. And then I also have this disclosure about buyers in a challenge market, what they can experience. We go over that in the buyer consultation package and the presentation, but you'll want to include that as well. But these are the disclosures I'm required to send you by law. And in essence, Shannon's done a great job of providing you what I send out. In the subject line just says disclosures, put the little simple line in there, and then I attach all the disclosures. And then I've got proof that I've delivered these to them and just kind of recapped our conversation. So that's first step. The next step is actually getting them to sign the buyer agency agreement. That's form 41A. So I have that all ready to go. So you can see a sample 41A that I have here. Savvy Buyer, I just dummied it up so you guys could see this. Typed in the date. 41A is the buyer agency agreement. Best Choice Realty also has a buyer agency agreement. But I want to basically have, in this, make it as real as possible for you tonight. I put my name, put Shannon's name. She might be the one actually representing this buyer. So I want her to be able to have access to the buyer as well. If you have 2 people on your team, you could put their names all in the agency. Agency can be established with, the buyer agency agreement is with the firm. So I have to be the one as a designated broker to hold the buyer accountable to the agency agreement. So you got to give me enough to work off of here. Make sure you put all of the names, especially if you're working with a team of people. Make sure you indicate dashes or hashes like I did with Rochelle Wilhite, Shannon Hall. Maybe you have a transaction coordinator that's going to end up writing this deal at some point. Make sure you put their name on there as well. And the agency, they gave you plenty of room to write. And then number 2, you can notice I typed in the specific address that I'm going to be hopefully showing my client, that the one that Kathleen has on 12345 Meridian in Puyallup. So I write that address on there, or I put any property listed in the 98372 area. You can be as specific as possible in that section of the area, or as vague as you want. You could put Pierce County. You could put the entire state of Washington. You could put the area of whatever you want. I do like that on the 41A for that instance. If you use the buyer agency agreement Best Choice Realty provides, you don't have the right. We put all areas of Washington because we do service all the areas of Washington. The term of the agreement, I cut that down to 60 days because the buyer is going to get he's going to go rent. This savvy buyer is going to go rent in 2 months if he's not able to secure a property. And then I end up writing the compensation of 2.5. And that's only because in the Puyallup area, we're seeing 2.5, and I'm willing to work for 2.5. If the buyer is able to pay for the 2.5, pay for my commission, in essence, I'm going to see if the seller will pay the compensation. If not, the buyer is agreeing to pay the 2.5%. And oftentimes I can wrap that into the contract if the seller is not willing to pay my commission. So the contract says if the seller is not willing to pay my commission, the buyer is paying me 2.5%. Now, then the buyer is pretty savvy. I got a savvy buyer, and he's like, Rochelle, you promised me, because I've worked with you before, that you'll give me some of your commission. If you'll scroll down, Shannon, the second section of this contract, I wanted to get the buyer. I knew that we had talked about that verbally in a conversation in the consultation. So in number 11, I wrote Best Choice Realty will credit buyer $1,000 at closing toward closing costs. That is the language you would want to write. If you're going to do some sort of credit or you're going to give them a rebate, those types of things are okay, as long as if you're getting financing, it has to be documented on the closing statement. It has to be provided in the contract. This is the way that you honor your promise. If I promise something in a verbal conversation, like a buyer consultation, like I did in this case, I would want to make sure it's in the buyer agency agreement. They shouldn't have any trouble signing this agreement. Basically, what that means is I'm going to try to negotiate for 2.5. If I'm not able to, then they are going to be paying 2.5. But at the end of the day, I'm going to give the buyer $1,000 credit at closing. Completely legal, and it's completely doable in this type of way. Buyer signs, I have a buyer agency agreement. Before you enter an off-market property, you must have a buyer agency agreement. That is the law, especially if you're going to represent a dual situation where you're going to represent the seller and you're going to represent the buyer. You must have a 41A or a buyer agency agreement before you transact. And you really should do it before you start negotiating and bringing that person into that house. Because the next agreement I'm going to show you is, let's just say we actually got Kathleen to say, yes, we want to go ahead and put your home on the market, or we want to list it or sell it to somebody that's off market. In order for me to negotiate and to put a contract in front of her, I have to also send her a copy of the disclosures, just like I did with the seller. I need to make sure I send the copy of those disclosures. So Shannon, if you want to remind people, we have to go back and we need to send Shannon or send Kathleen an email with all of these disclosures as well. That is still a requirement because the 47 and the 1A says that we have given the disclosures, that we have provided those disclosures, and we've done our good job as a good real estate broker should. So you do have to give disclosures not only to the buyer, but also to the seller when you represent a seller in that kind of way. So go back to 47. So this right here would need to be typed in. I'm sorry it's not typed, but we can go ahead and do that really quick. The seller would be Kathleen, and her name is Kathleen Vogel, is retained by Best Choice Realty, and commonly known as 12345, legally described. You have to have a legal description. So just like a listing, you do have to have a legal description. So before I actually take my client through the property, I am going to have to pull the title report, make sure I have the proper name, make sure I have the legal description. So you want to get a copy of the legal description from your title company. I contacted Chicago Title. They got me the last vesting deed. I knew I was dealing with the right person, and I do have the right legal description because the 47, unlike the 41A, requires a legal description to be attached or some sort of identifier. Notice that it says property there. I usually just write Exhibit A. And that covers my lot, my block, my division, my volume, my page, all of that. I just put Exhibit A, and I attach it, and I have the seller, Kathleen Vogel, initialed that she has received a copy of her legal description. And then here I put Shannon Hall, or whoever is the buyer. It was actually Savvy Buyer was who it is. Perfect. And then we would put in there the buyer. I'm going to just say 30 days is a long time to get a contract. I'm going to just go 7 days. So I put 7 days there. And then I'm going to appoint Rochelle Wilhike / Shannon Hall to represent. There we go. And then the compensation, here's where you guys get tricked up. It says the compensation. The seller is going to pay a compensation of, and we put a total compensation there. That is a conversation you're going to need to have with the seller. If we're going to do, they're going to sell to this potential person, then we're going to need to factor in the total compensation. So this is where the seller can sometimes get pushback. And they say, Kathleen says, I don't want to pay the buyer's commission. The buyer can fund their own commission. If they're like that, you're going to need to respect that. But there needs to be some sort of compensation tied if you're going to represent the seller in this fashion. If the seller's like, I don't want to sign this at all, you need to respect that, exit. You can still write up the contract, but the seller basically is going to retain their legal counsel or retain somebody else to write up or to review the purchase and sale agreement. But if you're going to represent them, there are duties that are associated with representing them in this fashion. And there is compensation, and there should be compensation tied to that. So if you're going to cover the buyer's, if the seller is going to pay the buyer's commission, in this case, we had a 2.5, and then I'm giving them $1,000 amount. I would need to factor in the total commission for representation, including that. So that would be, I'm going to say 4%, 4.5%. That's about what I would do if I was representing the seller and the buyer. You could certainly charge more. But I think that again, we're saving the seller some money and some hassle by doing this in this type of manner. So, I mean, I don't have to put the for sale sign. I don't have to do the open houses. I don't have to put on the MLS. I don't have to do all that marketing. And for that, so we can save the seller some money, but that's how you would write it in the compensation section. The part that I want to have Shannon highlight, go back, Shannon. Yep. Highlight the section where it says no marketing and fair market value, number 5. Right by the seller signing this, I often highlight this for my seller, but seller acknowledges that the firm will not market the property through the MLS, even though exposure to the property, to the open market through the MLS will increase the likelihood that the seller will receive fair market value for the property. And the seller understands that selling the property to the buyer without exposure could mean that the seller will receive lower a purchase price than a favorable terms. So sometimes the sellers are okay with that. They don't want people coming through their property. They don't want the hassle of having inspections. They don't want to have all of these things that they tell you. They have signed and agreed to term 5, and you've had a conversation with them about putting it on the market, and they're choosing not to by signing this Form 47. It does make sure that when we have a Form 47, the MLS requires us to notify them within 3 days of closing the off-market sale. That's how they keep track of the sales that are going in this type of manner, to make sure that we're following the rules and we're not doing some sort of pocket listing. Some of you have used that, and it's not the proper terminology. A pocket listing infers that you have a 1A. In this case, we don't have a listing agreement. We do not have a 1A. We have a seller representation agreement where the seller says, yes, Rochelle and Shannon, we do want you to represent us in this off-market type of situation where you do have a buyer that is going to tour my home and likes the home and wants to go ahead and move forward with the purchase and sale agreement that we will procure and bring to them within 7 days. If it's after 7 days in this agreement that I wrote, 7 days, the agreement does not come to pass, then the seller does not owe the 4.5% commission. So you do have to get mutual agreement within that 7 days in order for them to honor that 4.5% seller representation agreement. Okay, then they initial, and then they sign on the second page. And they will also initial the legal description. Are they undersigned the sole owners? They would check yes. I wish that said, have you opened preliminary title and verified as the listing agent or the seller representation agreement that you have here? Again, I messed up even the listing agreements in my brain. So you definitely want to have the seller sign it, and you want to make sure you've opened up the title and you confirm that that is truly the seller that has authorized to sell on behalf of the situation. You don't have a problem if you have not opened up title or verified the legal description or verified that the vesting deed is indeed the seller that signed the seller representation agreement, because you guys can get yourself into trouble there by allowing somebody to sell a property and a buyer buy a property that is not even the legal owner and is not the sole owner of the property. We've had instances like that have happened, and we've had to stop everything, back up. We have to redo the paperwork, and we have to make sure that we have a proper understanding of what's going on. So be very careful when you're using Form 47, but a lot of you can do it as long as you open up title and you verify that the people that you're meeting with are really the people that are signing here. And then you sign it and you send it to the firm. You send it to support@bestchoicerealtywa.com along with the legal description and the 47, and then we have a seller representation agreement. Just like a listing agreement, we require these in our firm if you're going to use a Form 47. It is perfectly fine, it's perfectly legal to represent a seller in this manner, as long as we get the proper paperwork. So then we're going to go, and we're actually going to write it up, and I think I'm running out of time, but we will get you started here, and I'll get you started. So Shannon's got it queued up here. We're going to go to next, and this would be us writing it up for the buyer. You will need, there's not an MLS number, so you will have to have a tax ID number in order to get to this point. Once you get to this point, you'll add the buyer, and we're going to actually add the buyer right here. Go ahead and click next. And let's go to the next so we can get to the forms. So the forms are going to have all of these forms. These are not the right forms. We're going to have to add some forms. And if you do it from your representing a buyer, you're going to have the forms that you'll need. but you're going to need the 21, and you'll need the 22. So go ahead and grab that one, Shannon. Yep. You're going to need the 22 FSBO. Okay. You're going to need the 22A because we're going to get financing for this. 22D. Yep, we need that one. I'm going to do a 22RA as well. And the reason for that is because I want to have no issue with the seller having the right to actually get an attorney to review it. My sister is pretty fussy and she has an attorney friend. She might want to review the paperwork. So that would be the 22RA. You actually don't need the 41C if we're doing the 47 in this manner, but that's fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab, I think we've got, did you grab the 22RA, Shannon, too? We want the 22RA as well. Oh, we did, we grabbed it. Okay, great. And then let's go to Form 21 and let's just go ahead and fill this out. I'm going to go fairly quickly. So in the interest of time, we might be over a little bit tonight, but hopefully this will help you. Today's date goes in there. The offer expiration date, we have a week to basically get this mutual. So I'm going to give them a few days to review it. So March 15th is fine. Buyer would be Savvy Buyer. We got the tax ID in there. We've got the address. We have all of those need to be selected as far as the appliances go, what's included, what's not included. The price, here's the part that you guys don't want to make this mistake on. The buyer says, Rochelle, what do you think the seller will accept as far as a price? When I represent both the buyer and the seller, I cannot give that kind of information. I cannot share what the seller has told me as far as the price that they need or how much they owe or any of that kind of information. The only thing I can provide the buyer with or the seller with is comparables and let them make up their mind as far as what price they want to offer. And I can give them a CMA. I can certainly provide a CMA. And if you are going to do it, you'll want to provide a copy and make sure you have a copy for yourself in case you were ever challenged that you devalued something. But you're going to want to make sure you give them a CMA and not tell them what price. That should be something in an email that they say to you, Rochelle, we want to go ahead and offer $600,000 for this. Okay, so that would be their understanding. That would be their number, not yours. And then I'm going to go ahead with earnest money. With off market, sometimes you can go with less. That's where off market you have the advantage. So let's go 6 and just go ahead and put the wire. I like the wire there. And then the delivery date, let's go 2 days after mutual acceptance. And then we're going to be held by, we never hold the earnest money. We always have the closing agent. Check that box. Chicago title, Chicago, that's who I open up the title with. So that was easy. Individual, my gal is Kim Chi. So I put Kim Chi in there. I never want to have that blank. I want somebody to be responsible for that file closing date. Now I'm going to go 30 days because my lender said we can do it in 30 days. So that's going to put us right at the very beginning of April. That's great. And FERPTA with the seller, I'm going to not check the box. I'm going to talk with the seller. I got to get that 22E and sent over. So leave that box unchecked. And then buyer broker, listing broker, they changed that. So buyer, listing broker, dual agent. Yep. So I'm a dual agent. We want to use that. Perfect. Check that one. Beautiful. And then we have to list the addenda. So 22A, 22D, 22RA, 22 FSBO. Good. Jan's going as quick as she can. She was quick tonight. That's great. 22K. And we got the 35 issue. I'm going to use the 35. As you guys may know, 35 now is in two different forms. So we're not going to waive it. We're going to do the inspection. So we're going to use 35. Yes. So perfect. 22A, 22D. Okay, got that. And we're going to go ahead. There is no listing agreement. So we could put a 41C, but I know that we have a 47. So, I don't need to include that. The seller is willing to pay my commission, so I can just have that conversation with my buyer. If they want to, they can put the 41C in there just to make sure that it's clear. So that would be 41C. That's listed there. Perfect. And there is no MLS number. So if it was listed before, do not use an MLS number on this. So you can see it's all X'd out. And then you can put little dashes if you want. That's fine. It makes it nice and clean. The status needs to be changed though, Shannon. Savvy buyer is an individual. So let's make sure that it's a single person, unmarried. Okay, and then we go down and we're gonna need to put in our both sections. So go down to the bottom left. Notice it autofilled. This listing should autofill actually if you do it correctly with the buyer side. This is how attorneys look. If both people are listed here on the bottom, most likely that means that you represent both the buyer and the seller. There are 2 transaction fees, so make sure you keep that in mind when you're negotiating your commission. When we represent both the buyer and the seller, there are 2 transaction fees. There's a $4.95 transaction fee for representing savvy buyer, and there's a $4.95 transaction fee for representing the seller. So make sure if you are going to be a dual agent that you realize that there are 2 transaction fees on this. And then support at bestchoicerealty.com. Yep, perfect. And then we're ready to go with the next form. So I wanted to at least just bring that to your attention so you understood how to fill out the purchase and sale agreement in this case. We will go over how to, let's go, if we have time, Shannon, I would like to record the 41C if we want to do that. I'm going to record that one tonight so that the only time we really use the 41C is when it's an off market. When you're concerned like, ooh, if this kind of, we want to make sure that what if this passes the 7 days and then the seller still wants to do the deal and they come back and they counter you, this would be an instance where we do want to use the 41C. So here it says the buyer's brokerage firm's commission, no compensation in the listing. We wouldn't check that box. The additional buyer brokerage firm, we wouldn't need to use that. But the third one, there is no written listing agreement. The seller agrees to pay the buyer's brokerage firm a commission of, and we put in there 2.5%. Okay, so that's how you basically are negotiating for the buyer so that the buyer is not having to come up with the funds on the 41A and having to come up with their own funds. The seller in this case is going to pay the 2.5% out of the total. And remember on the 47, we had a 4.5. So in that scenario, we would have been getting 2.5 of the 4.5 would be going towards paying the buyer's agent. The rest would go in the form of the listing or the seller representation commission. Okay. And then we would initial the bottom. So yes, we would want to use this if you're concerned about the 41A and your buyer's like, how am I going to make sure that the seller pays that commission? That's what you would use in order to do that. And the 22RA, remember I said that that's a great tool. This has come in handy many times, especially when I represent the seller or I'm, putting this together and they're like, ooh, a dual agency situation. I've always been, fearful of that. No problem. Let me go ahead and make sure that when we write the buyer, the buyer's contract, that we provide an attorney review contingency so you can have your attorney review the entire contract to make sure everything is done properly and to your liking. Then I check the box and then I write, 3 days, 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, whatever you want there. And give the buyer also the opportunity as well, just in case they want to have an attorney review the entire purchase and sale. And that has saved me a lot of hassle. When the seller says, we agreed on 6/10 and I think that the buyer knew about it. You know what? No, I have a CMA that I provided to you. I provide the same CMA to the buyer. And they came up with the price. Here's an email. I'm happy to provide that email to your attorney, what have you. I have made sure to have an attorney review so that in case you want a second layer of contingency, there's a way for them to back out if their attorney says that something didn't seem right or there was fraud or that whatever you have done improperly. Hopefully you've included all the right addenda and the right forms so that you don't have any problems. I've never had an attorney question me and the attorney backs down very quickly when they know that I've already opened title and I've already got the mutual agreement and I already have everything initialed and signed. I pretty much did their job for them and then they just get paid their flat fee for looking over the paperwork. I have never had a challenge by having that attorney review contingency in there. 22 FSBO, you do need to have the seller check that the seller warrants that this is or is not a distressed property. And then it does provide about a closing date and possession date. And then that's really the most important part is on that number 1, because you don't want to be stuck with them having a distress situation and then having a challenge down the road. So that's the reason for the 22 FSBO. Pretty meaty stuff, a lot of contracts we're having to dive through. Hopefully that was helpful for some of you that are looking at off market. Don't be scared of it. A lot of people are sending messages, text messages, phone calls, emails. They're doing whatever they can to get in touch with sellers, especially if you have a buyer and you have a buyer agency agreement and you need to go send some postcards out. Let's get the word out that you have a buyer. I mean, I've got one that I'm doing right now for a guy who's been looking for a few months, and we keep getting bid out. And the only way I think he's going to get a condo in Renton is if we actually send out some letters. So it's going to be a personal letter within a love letter that's attached from him to those potential sellers, with a letter from me just saying, if you're interested in working with this potential buyer, you can save yourself commission and do this off market. Please let me know if you're interested. And I'm going to put the solicitation clause at the bottom of my letter. So I'll be happy to provide that to you guys on Friday. So you look for an email that Shannon sends out on Friday with the recording and a sample, like a letter that I'm sending out to a sample set of sellers with that particular instance. So you guys can kind of see what I do and maybe copy and replicate and not get yourself in trouble. But those letters do work. It does get your phone to ring. And we have had some instances where they either put their home on the market, list it, or they sit down and have a conversation with you and say, no, let's go ahead and move forward with that buyer that you have. We don't want to have the hassle of putting our house on the market. So we are seeing that, and we're seeing great success, actually. In fact, one of our agents picked up 2 listings this last week just by making some phone calls in the area that her client was looking at. So I know it works. You just have to roll up your sleeves and get to work. And there's plenty of opportunity out there. You just have to be the market expert and get the right numbers. My sister might have, decided to, give her an opportunity. She just felt a little kind of underpriced. This agent obviously didn't know her numbers really well in the example that I started out with. So be sure you know the area numbers before you start quoting pricing and doing CMAs. Have a great week, you guys.